The gymnasium smelled of floor wax and nervous sweat, and at table 19 a girl in a second-hand cardigan stood beside a trifold board, while 3 of her classmates laughed loud enough for the row to hear. She did not flinch. She set her hand flat against the edge of the table, the way her grandmother used to set a hand flat against the kitchen counter. Before she said something that mattered, she waited for the judge to finish reading the title across the top of her board. The laughter behind her had a shape to it. It rose, dipped, then rose again when one of the boys repeated the word he thought was the funniest part of her project. She heard every word. She kept her eyes on the laminated card in the judge's hand. What the judge said next, 11 weeks later, would put her name on a letter from a university most of these children would never get into. Before we get to that, you need to understand how a 16-year-old built something real and rigorous out of a borrowed library, a dead woman's notebook, and a county that had already decided what she was worth. Her name was Talia Okonkwo, and on the morning of the regional science fair she had been awake since 4. She had not been awake because she was nervous. She had been awake because the bus that ran from her side of Halford County to the convention annex left at 6:12 and did not run again until 8, and an 8 o'clock bus would have made her late for setup. So she sat at the kitchen table in the dark, eating dry toast over a paper towel so she would not have to wash a plate, reading her own data one more time by the light of the stove hood. The notebook beside her toast was not hers. The cover was soft brown imitation leather, cracked at the spine, the corners rounded from years of being carried in an apron pocket. On the first page, handwriting that leaned hard to the right, was a single line. Ask the question nobody else is bored enough to ask. Her grandmother had written that line the year Talia was born, and Talia had read it so many times that the ink had started to lift where her thumb always landed. Let me take you back, because the notebook is where this whole thing starts. Grandma Esther had cleaned houses in the good part of Halford County for 31 years. She had also, in those 31 years, taught herself more chemistry than most of the people whose floors she mopped. She did it the way poor people have always done it, with a library card and a refusal to be ashamed of not knowing something yet. She kept the notebook because she could not afford the books, so she copied what she needed and gave the books back. Reaction rates, solubility tables, the behavior of metals in acid. Page after page of a housekeeper's careful hand, recording the secrets of a world that had never once asked her opinion. Esther had a saying she repeated until it lived in Talia's bones. Knowledge is the one thing nobody can take back once it's inside you. Not the bank, not the boss, not anybody. It belongs to you. Talia had heard it so often she stopped hearing it, the way you stop hearing a clock. Then Esther died, the winter. Talia turned 14, quietly, in a chair by the window, and the saying came back so loud it was almost unbearable. The project on the trifold board at table 19 had grown out of one page in that notebook. It was a page Esther had labelled, in her right-leaning hand, the rust problem. For years, Esther had watched the iron railings on the houses she cleaned eat themselves alive in the salter that drifted in off the bay, and she had filled 3 pages wondering why some metals surrendered faster than others, and whether anything cheap could slow it down. She never finished the thought. She ran out of time the way she ran out of everything, gradually and then all at once. Talia finished it for her. She had spent 11 months testing whether a compound she could brew from materials available at any hardware store, plus a fermented byproduct she pulled from kitchen scraps, could form a protective film on low-grade steel and slow corrosion in a salt water. Environment? She did not have a lab. She had the back porch, a row of mason jars, a thrift store digital scale accurate to 1/10 of a gram, and a county library that let her use the chemistry databases for free if she signed in by 9 in the morning before the computers filled with people looking for jobs. Now, here is the part you have to sit with for a moment. The girl standing at table 19, in the cardigan with the pilled cuffs, had produced a corrosion inhibition result that 2 of the judges would later be unable to explain without raising their eyebrows. And the children laughing behind her had spent their parents' money on kits ordered from a catalogue volcanoes and potato batteries, and one elaborate model of a wind turbine that did not turn. The gap between what Talia had done and what the room believed she could do is the entire reason this story exists. The boy who laughed loudest was named Brett Halloran, and his father sat on the county school board. Brett had read the title of Talia's project out loud in a voice meant to carry. Homemade rust stopper, he had said, drawing out the word homemade, like it was the punchline of a joke he had already told. The two friends beside him obliged him with the laugh he wanted. A teacher chaperoning the row glanced over, registered who was laughing and whose father he was, and looked back down at her clipboard. That was the first humiliation, and it was small, and Talia had survived smaller things before breakfast. She did not turn around. She watched the judge's eyes move down her board, line by line, and she counted the seconds the way Esther had taught her to count them, slow and even, until the heat went out of her face. The judge at table 19 that first round was a retired high school teacher named Mr. Dunmore, and he was tired. He had judged this fair for 19 years. He had a lunch he was looking forward to, and a row of 14 more tables after Talia's. He read her board the way a man reads a menu he has already decided not to order from. He asked her 2 questions. One about her control group, which she answered in 9 clean words, and one about whether her parents were in a scientific field, which she answered with a single word. No. He wrote something on his card. He did not tell her what. He moved to table 20. Talia stood very still and let the disappointment settle into a place she had built for exactly this. She had not expected Mr. Dunmore to understand what he was looking at. People like Mr. Dunmore had been not understanding her for as long as she could remember. The trick Esther had taught her was to never let their not understanding become your own. You were not being seen wrong. You were being looked at by someone who had decided in advance what they would find. Those are different things, and the difference is the only thing that will keep you sane. Let me paint the full picture of where she came from, because it matters for what happens in the spring. Harford County was 2 counties pretending to be one. There was the side along the bay, with the marina and the houses Esther used to clean, and there was the side where Talia lived, 3 miles inland, where the streets flooded every March and the high school shared a chemistry teacher with the middle school, because the budget would not stretch to 2. Talia attended Harford North, the inland school, and at Harford North the science curriculum had not been updated in the time anyone could remember. The single chemistry teacher, Ms. Reyes, was good and overworked and gone by 3 to drive to her second job. She had recognized something in Talia in the first week of 10th grade and had done the one thing an overworked good teacher can do. She gave Talia the key to the supply closet and told her to lock up when she was done. That closet, more than any classroom, was where the project lived in its early days. Talia stayed after school 3 days a week, alone among the expired reagents and the cracked beakers, running while she logged in a spiral notebook that she then copied, every night, into the back pages of Esther's brown notebook, so that her grandmother's book and her own work would live between the same covers. The closet had a single fluorescent tube that buzzed and flickered, and a window the size of a shoebox set too high to see out of, and a smell of old chalk and something faintly metallic underneath. She kept her steel coupons on the second shelf, behind a box of glassware nobody had touched since the budget for it dried up. She had cut the coupons herself from a sheet of low-grade steel a man at the hardware store sold her for $2, and a promise that she was not going to hurt herself, and she had filed the edges smooth with a kitchen file, and she had numbered each one in nail polish, because nail polish was cheap and it survived saltwater. She told no one. Not because it was secret, but because there was no one to tell who would have understood why a 16-year-old was spending her evenings in a bunk closet, watching steel sit in jars of brine, recording the colour of rust against a chart she had drawn by hand. There was one person, her younger brother, Micah, 11 years old, who did his homework on the kitchen floor while Talia worked at the table, and who had appointed himself the official labeller of mason jars. Micah wrote the dates on strips of masking tape in enormous careful letters, and he believed, with the total faith of a younger brother, that Talia was going to be famous. She told him to stop saying it. He never stopped saying it. The science fair was Ms. Reyes's idea. She had filled out the registration form herself and paid the $12 entry fee out of her own purse because the form had a line for a parent's signature and a line for a fee, and Talia had told her, without drama, that neither was going to happen at home. Talia's mother worked nights at a distribution warehouse 40 minutes away and slept during the day, and the household ran on a careful arithmetic of who was awake and who was asleep and what could not be afforded. A regional science fair was not in the budget. Miss Reyes made it in the budget. That is the kind of thing that does not show up in any story about success. The $12 a teacher quietly spends. And it is the reason Talia was standing at table 19 at all. So now you understand the gap. The girl who got laughed at had built something real in a supply closet with expired reagents, copied her results into a dead woman's notebook every night, and gotten to the fair on a teacher's $12. And the room saw a cardigan with pilled cuffs and a project called Homemade Rust Stopper. The first round of judging ended at 11:40. Scores were tallied behind a curtain. The top 6 projects in each category would advance to the afternoon round, where a second panel of judges, including one guest from outside the county, would select the regional winners. At 11:55, the advancing projects were announced over a crackling PA system, and Talia's number was not among the Chemistry 6. She had expected this too. She had told herself on the 6:12 bus that the not advancing was the likeliest outcome, and that it would not be the end of the work. The work did not need a ribbon. The work was the rust problem, and the rust problem did not care who advanced. She began, methodically, to take down her board. Here is the moment the story turns, and it turns on a stranger. The guest judge from outside the county had arrived late. Her flight had been delayed, and she had walked into the gymnasium at 11:45, just as the first round ended, carrying a leather satchel and an expression of someone who judged a great many of these, and had learned to keep her opinions behind her teeth. Her name was Dr. Yvonne Castellano, and she was a materials scientist who ran a corrosion research group at a university 4 states away. She judged regional fairs as a favor to a colleague, and because, she said, when asked, she liked to see what kids came up with before the world told them what was impossible. Dr. Castellano had missed the first round entirely. She arrived to find the Chemistry 6 already chosen, and a gymnasium full of half-disassembled boards. And because she was early for the afternoon round and had nothing to do, she did the thing she always did. She walked the rows that had not advanced. She walked them slowly, hands behind her back, reading the boards the children were folding up. Most of what she saw was what she expected: volcanoes, a potato battery, a wind turbine that did not turn. She was nearly to the end of the row when she stopped at table 19, where a girl in a cardigan was lifting a trifold board off the table, and Dr. Castellano said, "Wait." Talia stopped, board half lifted. "Doctor." Castellano set down her satchel. She read the board the way Mr. Dunmore had not, which is to say she read the methods section first, then the data, then went back to the methods. She asked about the fermented byproduct. Talia told her what it was and where it came from. Doctor. Castellano asked about the film thickness and how Talia had measured it without an instrument. Talia explained the workaround she had built with a kitchen scale and a known surface area, and Dr. Castellano went quiet in a way that Talia could not read. Then she asked the question that mattered. She asked Talia to walk her through the corrosion rate calculation, the actual arithmetic, the numbers behind the cleanest result on the board. And Talia, who had run that calculation so many times she could have done it asleep, walked her through it line by line, in the same 9-word clean style she had answered Mr. Dunmore, except this time the person listening understood every word. "What did Dr. Castellano say when Talia finished?" "Before we get to that, you need to understand what was actually on that board. Because if you do not understand the result, you cannot understand why a woman who had judged 100 of these fairs put down her satchel. Talia's controls showed standard corrosion. Bare steel in salt water, rusting on schedule, exactly as the textbook said. That was the flaw. The treated coupons, the ones she had coated with her hardware store and kitchen scraps film, corroded at a fraction of that rate. Not a small improvement. A large one, large enough that Dr. Castellano's first thought, she admitted later, was that the girl had made an error somewhere. The way undergraduates make errors, optimistic ones that flatter the result. So she had asked for the arithmetic, and the arithmetic was clean. There was no error. A 16-year-old with no lab had formulated a low-cost corrosion inhibitor that worked, and had measured its effect carefully enough to defend the measurement to a woman who measured corrosion for a living. Dr. Castellano looked at the board for a long moment. Then she looked at the curtain where the scores had been tallied, and her face did something complicated. She did not announce anything in the gymnasium. That is not how this story goes. There was no triumphant scene at table 19, no judge raising a girl's hand in the air. What happened instead was quieter and took longer and mattered more. Dr. Castellano asked Talia for two things. She asked for a photograph of every page of her data, taken on the spot with the scientist's own phone, and she asked whether Talia would be willing to talk by telephone the following week. Talia said yes to both. She finished taking down her board. She caught the 2 o'clock bus home with the trifold under her arm, and she did not tell anyone what had happened, because she was not sure anything had. Let me tell you what Talia did that night, because it tells you who she was. She did not celebrate. She had no reason yet to celebrate, and she was not a girl who celebrated things that had not happened. She came home, she heated soup for Micah, she helped him with his fractions on the kitchen floor, and then she sat at the table and opened Esther's notebook to the rust problem page. Under her grandmother's 3 pages of questions, in her own smaller hand, she had been writing answers for 11 months. That night she added one line. "A scientist read it today," she wrote. She read it the way you would have. And then she closed the notebook and went to bed, because the warehouse night arithmetic meant she had to be up early to get Micah to school. The phone call came the following Tuesday. Dr. Castellano had spent the weekend doing 2 things. She had run Talia's numbers through her own group's models, and she had made some inquiries. The numbers held. The inquiries told her something she found harder to sit with. She learned that Talia's project had been scored in the first round by a tired, retired teacher who had given it a middling mark and moved on, that it had not advanced, and that the reason it had not advanced was, as far as anyone could tell, that nobody in the first round had bothered to check the arithmetic. The result that should have stopped a judge in his tracks had been read as a cardigan and a homemade title, and a girl who said no. My parents are not scientists. On the phone, Dr. Castellano did not say any of that to Talia. What she said was this: "I have shown your data to 2 colleagues. We would like to understand how you did this." And then she asked the question that changed the arithmetic of the entire household. She asked whether Talia had thought about where she wanted to go to college. Talia had thought about it, the way you think about the weather on a planet you will never visit. She told Dr. Castellano the truth. She said she was going to apply to the State Branch campus 40 minutes away because it was the one she could get to on the bus and the one she could afford, and that she would study what she could and work nights like her mother if she had to. She said it plainly, without apology, the way she said everything, because she had stopped years ago dressing up the size of her life to make other people comfortable with it. She gave the facts and let them stand. There was a silence on the line. It went on long enough that Talia checked the screen to see if the call had dropped. It had not. Dr. Castellano was simply thinking, in the way of a person rearranging what she had assumed about the world. Then she said something that Talia wrote down word for word in the notebook that night, because she did not trust her memory to hold it. Dr. Castellano said, "I think you should aim at the place that will actually teach you what you are clearly ready to learn." And then she said the name of the institute where she had done her own doctoral work, the one 4 states away, the one with a name everyone knows, and she said, "I would like to help you apply now." Here is where a lesser story would skip to the happy ending, and here is where this story slows down, because the spring did not arrive all at once, and the road from a hardware store experiment to a university letter ran straight through every doubt Talia had ever been taught to carry. The application was its own mountain. There were essays, and there were forms that assumed a kind of household Talia did not have, and there was a recommendation requirement that asked for a teacher who had supervised laboratory work. Ms. Reyes wrote that letter at her kitchen table after her second job shift, and she cried while she wrote it, though Talia did not know that until much later. There was the matter of standardized tests Talia had taken once on a fee waiver, in a gymnasium not unlike the one where she had been laughed at. And there was the deeper thing, the thing nobody puts on a form, which was that Talia had spent 16 years being quietly informed by every system she touched that places like the one doctor Castellano named were not for girls like her. She nearly did not apply. There was a week in January when the doubt won. When she looked at the supplemental essay prompt and at the application fee, even waived, at the sheer audacity of a girl from Harford North, aiming at a name like that, and she put the whole thing in a drawer. The drawer is where dreams from her side of the county usually went. She knew the drawer well. It was Micah who got the application out of the drawer, in a manner of speaking. He did not know it was in there. What he did was simpler. One evening he was labelling a fresh row of jars for a follow-up trial Talia was running, writing the dates in his enormous, careful letters, and he said, without looking up, "When you're famous, can I have your old jars?" And Talia laughed, the first real laugh in a week, and then she stopped laughing. Because she understood that the 11-year-old on the kitchen floor believed in a version of her that she had just folded up and put in a drawer. She took the application out that night. She finished the essay by the weekend. She wrote the essay about the notebook. She did not write it the way a consultant would have told her to write it, with a tidy arc and a lesson learned. She wrote about a woman who cleaned houses for 31 years and taught herself chemistry from library books she had to give back, and who filled 3 pages with a question about rust that she did not live to answer. She wrote that she had spent 11 months answering it. She wrote her grandmother's line about knowledge being the one thing nobody can take back. And she wrote that she had finally understood it not as comfort, but as instruction. She did not write the word brave anywhere in the essay, and she did not ask the reader to feel anything. She just told them what had happened and let the facts stand where they fell. Dr. Castellano, true to her word, helped. She did not write Talia's essay, and she did not pull a string that did not exist. What she did was the legitimate version of help, the version that removes a barrier without doing the work behind it. She wrote a letter of her own, as the outside judge who had examined the data, attesting that she had personally verified the methodology and the result, and that in 20 years of evaluating young scientists she had rarely seen work of this quality from an applicant of this age. She sent Talia's data, with Talia's permission, to the Admissions Science Review the Institute used for applicants claiming significant research. And then she stepped back, because the rest had to be Talia's, and she knew it. The waiting was its own season. February in Harford County is grey, and the streets on Talia's side flood on schedule, and Talia did what she had always done with waiting, which was work. She started a new trial. She kept Micah's jars labelled. She helped her mother fill out the warehouse paperwork that came in envelopes nobody in the house liked to open. She did not let herself imagine the letter, because imagining the letter was a way of inviting the drawer back. The letter came in late March, on a Thursday, in a thin envelope, and everyone knows what a thin envelope is supposed to mean. Talia held it at the mailbox for a long moment. Thin envelopes are rejections. Everyone says so. She walked it inside, set it on the kitchen table next to Esther's notebook, and she did not open it until Micah got home, because if it was the drawer after all, she wanted to be the one who told him gently, so the world would not get to do it first. Micah came home. He saw the envelope. He saw the name on the corner. He went very still in a way that an 11-year-old should not know how to go still. And he said, "Open it." She opened it. It was thin because the substance was elsewhere. The single page on top was an offer of admission, and clipped behind it was a second page, and the second page was the one that took the floor out from under the kitchen. The Institute had reviewed her submitted research. On the strength of the work and the verified result, and a recommendation from a corrosion scientist they apparently took seriously. They were offering Talia a place in the incoming class and a named scholarship that covered tuition in full. Established, the letter said, for students whose achievement had outpaced their access. Achievement that had outpaced access. Talia read that line 3 times. Somebody 4 states away, who had never seen her cardigan, or her side of the county, or the supply closet with the expired reagents, had found a phrase for the exact shape of her life, and had attached money to it. Micah did not say anything clever. He was 11. What he did was put his face against his sister's shoulder and breathe, hard, the way you breathe when the thing you announced to the whole kitchen for 2 turns out to be true. Talia stood with the letter in one hand and her brother under the other arm, and she looked, over the top of his head, at the brown notebook on the table. Let me tell you what happened to the people in this story, because the ripple matters as much as the stone, Ms. Reyes found out the way teachers find out, which is sideways. When Talia knocked on the open door of the chemistry room after the last bell with the letter in her hand and could not get the words out, so she just held it up. Miss Reyes read it standing in the doorway. She did not say anything for a moment. Then she sat down on a lab stool, and the woman who had paid $12 out of her own purse and written a recommendation through tears at her kitchen table put her hand over her mouth and let herself for 1 minute, in an empty classroom, be undone by a good thing. Talia had never seen a teacher cry. She would not forget it. The fair found out too, eventually, because Dr. Castellano made sure it did. She did not write an angry letter. She wrote a precise one. She wrote to the Regional Fair's organizing committee, as the outside guest judge they had invited for their credibility, and she described, without heat, what she had found at Table 19 among the projects that did not advance. She noted that a result of clear significance had been scored and dismissed in the first round without anyone verifying the central calculation. She did not name Mr. Dunmore. She did not have to. She suggested, in the dry institutional language that lands harder than any shout, that the fair might consider revising its judging protocol, so that any anomalous result be independently checked before a project was eliminated, and that judges be reminded that the appearance of a project and the family of a student were not data. The committee read the letter from the scientist, whose name had given their fair its shine. They did the thing institutions do when a person they cannot dismiss tells them they have failed in a way that can be documented. They adopted the protocol. The following year and every year after, the regional science fair required a second reviewer to verify any flagged result before elimination, and the form that judges carried had a line at the bottom, added quietly, reminding them that the most important question is the one nobody in the room is bored enough to ask. Nobody at the fair knew where that line came from. Talia knew. Dr. Castellano had asked her on the phone whether there was anything of his grandmother's she would want carried forward, and Talia had given her the line. And the line was now printed on a form that every judge in the county would hold for years to come, including the following spring, who held it and read it, and did not know that the girl at Table 19 had written it into being. As for Brett Halloran, the boy who read the title out loud in a voice meant to carry. Nothing dramatic happened to Brett, and that is the truth. And it is a better truth than a comeuppance. Brett's wind turbine friend, the one whose turbine did not turn, mentioned to someone that the girl they had laughed at had gotten into a school Brett's father had bragged Brett would apply to and not gotten into. The story travelled the way stories travel in a county that is 2 counties pretending to be one. Brett did not apologize, because boys like Brett do not learn that fast. What changed was quieter. The laughing stopped being funny to the people who had laughed, which is a different thing from being punished, and in the long run, a heavier one. The room that had laughed had to live, after that spring, with knowing it had laughed at the wrong person, and a room that knows that grows quieter on its own. Talia spent that summer working. Because the scholarship covered tuition, and not the bus to the airport, or the winter coat she would need 4 states north, or the 100 small costs of leaving, she worked at the same warehouse her mother worked at on the day shift, scanning boxes down a line until her wrist ached, And the two of them rode home together in the early evening, with the windows down, mother on the night side of her sleep and daughter on the day side of hers, passing each other in the middle like two hands on a clock. In the evenings she ran one last set of trials on the back porch, with Micah labelling the jars, because she wanted to leave the rust problem in a state her grandmother would have recognized as finished. The porch boards were warm under her feet, and the cicadas were loud, and Micah wrote the dates in his enormous, careful letters and asked, every single evening, whether the treated coupon was still winning. It was. It kept winning. She wrote up the final results in the back of the brown notebook, in the small hand that lived under her grandmother's larger one, and she checked the arithmetic twice the way Dr. Castellano had checked it. Because she understood now that the checking was the whole job, that the world was full of right answers. Nobody bothered to verify, and wrong ones everybody believed. Under the line where she had written "A scientist read it today," she wrote the last entry. "Going to finish your question where they have the real instruments," she wrote. "Taking your book with me." She did not take the trifold board. She left it folded behind the couch, because a board is just a board. She took the notebook. "Here is what I want you to understand, you who have been listening, before this girl gets on a plane for the first time in her life. The laughter at table 19 was not the obstacle. The laughter was loud, and it was cruel, and it was easy to point at. But it was not the thing that almost stopped her. The thing that almost stopped her was the drawer. It was the quiet voice. Trained into her by 16 years of being looked at, by people who had decided in advance what they would find, that told her the application belonged in the drawer with all the other dreams from her side of the county. Brett's laugh she could survive before breakfast. The drawer nearly won. What beat the drawer was not a scholarship and was not a scientist's phone call, though those came. What beat the drawer was an 11-year-old labelling jars who asked if he could have them when she was famous, and a teacher who spent $12 she did not have, and a woman in a chair by a window who wrote one line in a notebook before she ran out of time and made her granddaughter promise, without ever saying the words, to ask the question nobody else was bored enough to ask. You have a notebook somewhere, too. Maybe not made of paper. Maybe it is a thing somebody who loved you said once, and you stopped hearing the way you stop hearing a clock. Maybe it is a question you have been answering quietly for months in a closet nobody knows about. The people who laugh at your board have already told you everything they know, which is nothing about you. The only voice that matters is the one that asks whether you are going to leave the application in the drawer. So before you close this, ask yourself the honest version of Talia's question. What is the work you have been doing in private that you have already decided is not for someone like you? And who is the 11-year-old in your life, real or remembered, who believes in the version of you that you just folded up and put away? Take it back out of the drawer. That is the whole lesson. And a woman who cleaned houses for 31 years would tell you it is the only one that ever mattered. Talia got on the plane in August with one suitcase and a brown notebook cracked at the spine, and she did not look back at the county that had decided what she was worth, because the county had been wrong, and a wrong answer, her grandmother used to say, is just a question somebody gave up on too early. She did not intend to give up on hers. She had a rust problem to finish, and now, finally, she had the instruments to finish it. And somewhere 4 states north, a scholarship with her grandmother's life encoded in its very definition was waiting to teach her everything she was, so clearly ready to learn.